The scorching sun beat down on the streets of Southern California in the late 1970s, where life seemed vibrant, full of energy, and the promise of endless summers. Teenagers laughed, hitchhiked, and dreamed under the open sky, unaware that lurking in the shadows was a nightmare waiting to unfold, one that would forever stain the quiet neighborhoods with fear. Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker was a man whose life was shaped by darkness from an early age. Born in 1940 in Missouri, he grew up in an unstable and violent household. Reports from his youth describe a boy who was cruel to animals and showed early signs of a disturbed mind. His early crimes were minor, petty theft, vandalism, but beneath the surface simmered a sinister obsession with control and power, especially over women. His fantasies of domination and torture were twisted and dark, and they grew with time. Roy Lewis Norris came into the world 8 years later in 1948. Ohio. His childhood was no less troubled, marked by neglect and abuse. He was a loner, with a history of petty crimes and unstable behavior. Compared to Bittaker, Norris was less dominant, often described as eager to please, more passive, and easily influenced. Their fateful meeting in California in the 1970s brought together two damaged souls whose twisted fantasies aligned perfectly. Bittaker, the dominant predator, and Norris, the submissive accomplice, bonded over their shared dark desires. Soon, they devised a horrific plan to kidnap young women, torture them with instruments they kept in a toolbox, and murder them. Their weaponry was chillingly ordinary pliers, screwdrivers, knives, but in their hands. These tools became instruments of unimaginable suffering. They outfitted a white van with soundproofing and restraints a mobile torture chamber. Their victims were often teenage girls, hitchhiking and unsuspecting. Their first known victim was Judith and Irvin, 16 years old, whose cheerful life was stolen on Halloween night. 1979. Hitchhiking in the San Fernando Valley, she accepted a ride from the two men. Judith's death was the grim start of a series of brutal crimes. Over the following months, Bittaker and Norris kidnapped and murdered at least 4 more young women: Leila Nikki Wilson, Shirley Lynette Ledford, Patricia Patty Jackson, and Tina Marie Fail. Each victim endured the same horror kidnapping, torment with the toolbox, and death. Despite their careful planning, cracks began to show. Norris's conscience gnawed at him, and by early 1980, he confessed to police, revealing the full extent of their crimes. The police recovered the toolbox, the white van, the cassette tapes, and other evidence. The trial was one of the most chilling in California's history. The tapes were played in court, exposing the horrifying cruelty. Both men were convicted and sentenced to death. The story of the Toolbox Killers is a dark journey into the depths of human evil, but also a reminder of the resilience of justice and the importance of vigilance. Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker's life was marked by turmoil from the very beginning. Born in 1940 in Kansas City, Missouri, Lawrence's childhood was far from the idyllic picture of innocence. His family environment was unstable and often violent. His mother, often described as neglectful and indifferent, struggled to provide a nurturing home. His father was largely absent, leaving young Lawrence to navigate a world that offered little warmth or guidance. From an early age, Lawrence exhibited troubling behaviors that hinted at the darkness within. Neighbors and relatives later recounted how he showed cruelty toward animals, an early warning sign that would later be linked to violent offenders. He would catch cats and birds, torturing them for his own twisted amusement. These acts were dismissed or ignored by the adults around him, leaving his disturbing impulses unchecked. At school, Lawrence was withdrawn and isolated. He struggled to connect with other children, often seen as an outcast. His fascination with violent images and stories grew. By adolescence, he was already engaging in petty crime, stealing, vandalism, and other small offenses. His disdain for authority was clear, but more frightening was his emerging obsession with control and domination, especially over women. Lawrence's adult life was marked by a string of minor convictions and periods of incarceration, but nothing foreshadowed the monstrous crimes he would commit. Those who knew him described him as quiet but unseen man who rarely showed emotion, but whose eyes betrayed something dark lurking beneath. Psychologists later suggested that Bittaker exhibited traits of antisocial personality, lack of empathy, manipulativeness, and a propensity for cruelty. His fantasies of kidnapping and torturing women were not fleeting thoughts, but deeply ingrained desires that he sought to realize. When he met Roy Norris in California in the mid-1970s, Lawrence found in him a willing partner, someone easily influenced and ready to follow. Together, their shared darkness fueled the creation of a plan so horrific it would shock the nation. Roy Lewis Norris's early years were marked by instability and hardship. Born in 1948 in Ohio, Norris grew up in an environment far from nurturing. His family life was fractured, with accounts of neglect and abuse shadowing his childhood. Unlike Lawrence Bittaker, whose cruelty seemed calculated and dominant, Norris's behavior was often a reflection of fear, insecurity, and a desperate search for acceptance. As a child, Norris struggled to find a place where he belonged. He was quiet and withdrawn, often overlooked or dismissed by those around him. His early brushes with the law were minor petty thefts, truancy, and other youthful mischief, but underlying these acts was a deeper psychological turmoil. Throughout his adolescence and early adulthood, Norris's behavior became increasingly erratic. He showed signs of low self-esteem, vulnerability to manipulation, and a susceptibility to peer influence. It was during this vulnerable period that he moved to California, seeking a fresh start. There, he met Lawrence Bittaker, a man whose confidence and dominance filled the void Norris felt in his own life. Bittaker's forceful personality drew Norris in, providing a twisted sense of belonging and purpose. Together, they forged a dark partnership, Bittaker as the mastermind, Norris as the willing accomplice. Experts who later studied Norris's psychological profile identified him as someone with dependent personality traits, lacking the assertiveness and control that Bittaker exhibited. This dynamic made him susceptible to being drawn into Bittaker's violent fantasies and actions. Despite his involvement, Norris would later express remorse and guilt over the crimes, feelings that ultimately led to his confession and cooperation with law enforcement. His role, though complicit, was that of a follower, a man trapped in the grip of a more powerful and sadistic partner. On the chilly evening of October 31st, 1979, 16-year-old Judith and Irvin set out from a friend's house in the San Fernando Valley, hoping to catch a ride home. The streets were alive with Halloween festivities, but for Judith, The night held no special promise, only the routine desire to get home safely. As she waited by the roadside, a white van with tinted windows pulled up. The driver, Lawrence Bittaker, accompanied by Roy Norris, offered Judith a ride. To a trusting teenager, it seemed a simple act of kindness. But once inside, the door locked behind her with a sinister click. The van was no ordinary vehicle, it was a mobile prison. Inside, the walls were soundproofed and restraints hung ready. Judith was forced into the cramped back area, quickly bound and silenced. What followed was a nightmarish ordeal. Using tools from their infamous Toolbox, pliers, screwdrivers, knives, Bittaker and Norris inflicted brutal and unthinkable torture. Judith screamed and begged, but her cries were met with cruel laughter. Hours passed as the tormentors worked with calculated cruelty, sometimes hesitating but ultimately complicit. They recorded the entire attack on cassette tapes, their voices interspersed with Judith's terrified screams, evidence of their depravity captured forever. Eventually, Judith's strength waned. She was murdered in that same van, her life extinguished amid unimaginable suffering. Days later, her body was discovered in a remote, dry riverbed, battered and broken, haunting testament to the evil she had endured. Judith's family was devastated. Their daughter's disappearance turned into a nightmare they could hardly comprehend. Yet, their grief fueled a relentless pursuit of justice, ensuring that Judith's story would not be forgotten. This horrifying beginning marked the start of a killing spree that would terrorize Southern California, leaving a trail of pain, loss, and shattered lives. Leila Nikki Wilson was only 13 years old, a young girl full of hope and innocence. She was heading to a family gathering on a chilly November evening in 1979, her heart set on reuniting with loved ones. Nikki was shy but spirited, with dreams far beyond her years. As she walked along a quiet road, hoping for a ride, fate intervened cruelly. A white van with dark windows slowed beside her. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, armed with their infamous toolbox and chilling intent, beckoned her inside. What Nikki thought would be a simple ride quickly turned into a waking nightmare. Bound and trapped inside the soundproofed van, she endured hours of torture inflicted with pliers, screwdrivers, and knives. The killer's laughter echoed as they recorded her terror on cassette tapes, a sick trophy of their cruelty. Nikki fought bravely, her spirit unbroken even as her body was battered. But the physical torment was relentless. Eventually, her life was stolen, her young dreams extinguished by unimaginable brutality. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through her family and community. The fear that had begun with Judith Irvin's murder deepened, and parents warned their children to avoid hitchhiking. At all costs, the discovery of Nikki's body in a remote area confirmed the worst fears. She had been subjected to the same horrific fate as the first victim. Another innocent soul lost to the merciless Toolbox killers. Her story serves as a solemn reminder of vulnerability and the importance of vigilance. Shirley Lynette Ledford was 19 years old, a young woman full of promise and dreams. She had plans to build a life for herself, with hopes of independence and happiness. Her family described her as bright, caring, and full of life. The world was hers to explore, but fate had a darker path planned. In late 1979, Shirley was hitchhiking along a lonely stretch of road in Southern California. Just like so many young women before her, the white van appeared once against windows dark, its interior a trap waiting to be sprung. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris offered her a ride, a seemingly ordinary gesture that masked their terrifying intentions. Once inside, Shirley was forced into the cramped, soundproofed back of the van. The nightmare she faced was a repetition of the horror endured by others' restraints, cruel taunts, and unimaginable torture with the tools from the infamous Toolbox. For hours, Shirley suffered. The men used pliers, screwdrivers, knives, and other implements to inflict pain and terror. They recorded their brutality on cassette tapes, their laughter echoing alongside Shirley's desperate cries. Despite the overwhelming fear, Shirley's spirit showed incredible strength, but ultimately, the physical torment was too great and she was murdered. Her life cruelly cut short, her disappearance and death intensified the terror gripping the community. Families lived in fear, and the warnings grew louder. Do not hitchhike, be wary of strangers, and stay safe. Shirley's story is a stark reminder of how quickly a life can be shattered, and how important it is to protect the vulnerable. Patricia Patty Jackson was an 18-year-old with a bright future ahead of her. Friends described her as lively and full of warmth, someone who brought joy to those around her. She was ambitious, hoping to continue her education and make a better life for herself. One fateful day in early 1980, Patty decided to hitchhike, a common practice at the time, but one that would cost her dearly. The white van appeared, offering a ride that would change her life forever. Once inside, Patty was trapped. The horrors that awaited her were the same as those suffered by others before her restraint. Torture and unspeakable cruelty carried out with tools from the killer's infamous Toolbox. Her screams and pleas were recorded, etched forever on the cassette tapes that would become crucial evidence in the killer's trial. Despite her bravery, Patty was ultimately murdered, another innocent victim lost to Bittaker and Norris. The community's fear grew as the pattern became clearer. Parents warned their children, and the once common practice of hitchhiking began to fade into near extinction. Patty's story, like those before her, reminds us of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in a world where danger can lurk behind seemingly kind gestures. Tina Marie Fail was only 17 years old, a runaway searching for freedom, safety, and a place to belong. Her vulnerable status made her an easy target, a heartbreaking reminder of how those on the fringes of society can become prey. On a cold night in early 1980, Tina was hitchhiking along a deserted road in Southern California. The white van pulled over, and Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, armed with their toolbox of horrors, offered her a ride she could never refuse. Inside the van, Tina was restrained, silenced, and subjected to the same terrifying ordeal suffered by the young women before her. Pliers, screwdrivers, knives, the tools of their cruelty were used to inflict pain, fear, and helplessness. The killers recorded her terror on cassette tapes, forever capturing the darkest moments of human cruelty. Tina fought bravely, but was ultimately murdered. Her body was discovered later, a grim confirmation of the killer's reign of terror. Her death marked the final chapter in the Toolbox killer's spree, a tragic end to a series of unimaginable crimes that left a community shattered and a nation horrified As the months passed after the disappearances of young women around Southern California, the police forces faced mounting pressure. The community was gripped by fear. Parents kept their children close, and the media clamored for answers. But the killers had covered their tracks well. Each victim had last been seen hitchhiking, and their bodies were found in remote, isolated locations, often days after their disappearance. This pattern, while chilling, made the investigation especially difficult. The lack of direct witnesses and limited forensic technology at the time added to the challenges. Detectives began piecing together the fragments. They discovered a link between the victims. All had been picked up by a white van. This clue led officers to canvass the neighborhoods and question locals who might have seen such a vehicle. Meanwhile, the pressure took a toll on Roy Norris. Haunted by guilt and the fear of capture, Norris's conscience began to break the wall of silence. In early 1980, he took a courageous and terrifying step. He confessed to the police, detailing his involvement and implicating Lawrence Bedecker. Norris provided chilling accounts of the kidnappings, the torture, and the murders. He described the modified van, soundproofed and equipped with restraints, and the grisly toolbox filled with instruments designed solely to inflict pain. Armed with Norris's confession, the police secured search warrants. They found the infamous van and the toolbox, along with cassette tapes recorded by the killers during the attacks. These tapes contained the voices and screams that would become key evidence. Forensic experts matched evidence from the crime scenes to the items recovered. The confessions, physical evidence, and recordings created an airtight case. The arrests of Bedecker and Norris shocked the community, but brought a sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over, and justice was within reach. The courtroom was packed with tension, grief, and anticipation as Lawrence Bedecker and Roy Norris faced charges for a series of horrific kidnappings, tortures, and murders. Families of the victims sat in silent agony while the media broadcast every detail of the trial, ensuring the world knew the full horror of the Toolbox killers. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case, beginning with Roy Norris's detailed confession. His chilling testimony described the methodical nature of the crimes, the abductions, the prolonged torture using tools from the infamous toolbox, and the final acts of murder. Then came the physical evidence, the white van, modified, with soundproofing and restraints, the actual tools used for torture: pliers, screwdrivers, knives, and, most disturbingly, the cassette tapes. The court listened as excerpts were played, the screams of the victims punctuated by the killers' cruel laughter. The raw, unfiltered horror shocked even the most seasoned legal observers. Throughout the trial, Bedecker remained cold and unrepentant, rarely showing emotion. Norris, in contrast, appeared remorseful at times, acknowledging his complicity and expressing regret for his actions. The defense tried to downplay Norris's involvement, suggesting he was coerced and manipulated by Bedecker. But the overwhelming evidence and consistent testimony made their arguments ineffective. After days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts against both men. The judge sentenced them to death, ensuring they would never again harm another soul. The trial was a stark reminder of humanity's darkest depths, but also of the justice system's ability to bring even the most depraved to account. The conviction of Lawrence Bedecker and Roy Norris brought a measure of justice to the families devastated by the brutal loss of their loved ones. Yet, the scars left by the Toolbox killer's reign of terror would linger in the community and beyond for decades. The case forced law enforcement agencies across California and the nation to rethink how they approached serial crimes, especially those involving mobile predators who preyed on vulnerable hitchhikers. It highlighted the need for better communication between jurisdictions and more sophisticated forensic techniques. Public awareness campaigns grew, urging young people and families to be cautious, especially with hitchhiking. The once common practice dwindled rapidly as fear replaced convenience. Psychologists and criminal profilers studied Bittaker and Norris extensively, gaining insights into the minds of sadistic killers. Their twisted partnership became a textbook example of dominant-submissive dynamics in criminal duos, influencing future profiling and investigations. The cassette tapes, though horrifying, provided invaluable evidence and a grim window into the killer's psychology, underscoring the role of audio forensics in modern criminal justice. Lawrence Bittaker died in prison in 2019, and Roy Norris passed away in 2020. Their deaths closing the final chapter on a dark and tragic story. But the legacy of the Toolbox killers remains a powerful cautionary tale, a reminder of the capacity for evil to hide in plain sight and the enduring need for vigilance, compassion, and justice.